Ever feel like you're stuck in a never-ending search for that perfect award space, but the airport you're flying out of just doesn't have award availability? This might be the case if you're based in a smaller airport, like Canada's Winnipeg or Kansas City in the US. And with fewer direct international airline options out of these airports, your dreams of redeeming points for travel might feel frustratingly out of reach. But what if we told you there's a clever way to optimize your flight to open up a whole new world of possibilities? You can choose all the first class and business class flights to your heart's content simply by choosing strategically which airport you fly out of. Welcome to Prince of Travel, we're the leading platform empowering every global citizen to go further better, and in this video, we'll share with you a strategy that I've personally used to unlock thousands of dollars worth of first-class flights on my points, and that's known as positioning flights, simply by taking an extra flight to get to the place that you want to start your journey out of. Without further ado, I'll pass it along to TJ in the studio.
So what exactly are positioning flights? Well, positioning flights are secondary flights that you take to get yourself to a different hub airport from where you can catch better award availability or better premium products that you can't find from closer to home. You can think of them as a necessary detour that you can take in order to access the flights that you actually want. Now, one of the main ways that people use positioning flights is to get themselves to a place where they can have a long-haul flight in comfort. And that means that they take a not-so-glamorous positioning flight in economy so that they can fly in business class or first class to their destination. Now, another way that people use positioning flights is to fly into a place that's maybe close to their destination but not quite where they want to be, and then take an alternative form of transportation like a bus or a train, or even a short haul flight in economy on the other side of their long haul flight. So how are positioning flights helpful? Well, positioning flights can help you find better award flights or even cash flights if you can find a really good deal. So maybe you've searched for a long haul flight out of your home airport only to find that there was no award availability, but if you expand your search to other airports that are kind of nearby where you can take a positioning flight to, you might find that you get the flight that you actually want departing from a different airport, which means that you have to take a positioning flight to get yourself there. So if you're like me and you live on Vancouver Island, where there aren't many international flights, you always have to go through a main hub to get to where you want to be. Now, if you live in Canada, you've probably noticed that there aren't a lot of first class routes that airlines offer, but there are a lot of first class routes that they offer to cities in the United States. So if you want to fly in first class instead of business class, you'll probably have to fly to a city in the United States first with a positioning flight so you can access the most premium award cabins out there. Now, positioning flights are a bit of a step up for anybody in the miles and points game, and that's because positioning flights require you to think about a much broader scope than just your local airport. So when you're searching for awards, you don't just search from your local airport, but you search from an entire country or even an entire continent instead, and then use positioning flights to get you to where you need to be. And positioning flights are actually a necessary evil for people who live in smaller cities across the world. For example, if you live in a smaller city like Winnipeg, there aren't too many options to fly too far, maybe some domestic flights, and maybe a couple of transborder routes, but that's it. So you'll probably have to look to a larger hub like Toronto or even Chicago to find greater award availability on all those long-haul routes. So for example, if a person from Winnipeg wants to fly to Istanbul with Turkish Airlines, they're going to have to position themselves to Toronto, Montreal, New York, Chicago, or a number of other cities so that they can get the award that they want. Now, when it comes to booking a positioning flight, you typically book it on a separate itinerary from your long-haul route. So for example, you might fly from Winnipeg to Toronto on one booking, and then from Toronto to Istanbul on another. Now, one thing that's really important whenever you book positioning flights like this is to leave an ample amount of buffer time between the two flights. So if you miss the first positioning flight, you put yourself at risk of losing the entire itinerary because you're not required to be reaccommodated for missing a second flight, which is on a whole nother ticket. So at the bare minimum, you want to leave yourself at least a few hours in between the two separate flights, or what some people do is they book an overnight layover instead to leave a lot of buffer room. And if your positioning flight is on a really popular route, like flying from Toronto to New York, or maybe from New York to Los Angeles, you want to book yourself as early in the day as possible. And that's because flights that leave earlier in the day are less likely to be delayed, and even if they are, there should be plenty of flights for you to get on later in the day, which should give you a chance of making your connecting flight. And in an ideal world, you'd be able to book a positioning flight on the same airline that you're connecting through with, or at least in the same alliance. And that's because if you're checking baggage, if you're on the same airline, there's a good chance that they should be able to check it through to the final destination instead of having to pick it up and check it back in for your next flight. Plus, if you happen to book two separate itineraries with the same airline, there's a better chance that they'll be able to help you in the event that one of your flights is canceled, delayed, and you need to be rebooked. So for example, if you miss your flight with Air France because of an issue with your positioning flight with Air Canada, you're responsible for booking yourself to your final destination, which can be costly and stressful, especially at the last minute. And before I share with you some tips and tricks about positioning flights, be sure to to like this video and subscribe to our channel, which goes a long way to helping support us here at Prince of Travel and the work that we do. So as you become more familiar with the miles and points world, you're going to find yourself searching for specific airlines, specific cabins, and specific products that are only available on certain routes. And depending on where you live and how you want to fly, you'll probably find that the specific product that you have your eyes on just isn't available from your local airport, and that's when you need a positioning flight. Now in Canada, one of the best examples of this is flying in the world's best business class Qatar Airways Q Suites. Now Qatar Airways only offers flights to one city in Canada, and that's Montreal. Now alternatively, Qatar Airways also flies to a lot of cities in the United States, so if you live in Western Canada, it might make more sense for you to fly to Seattle or San Francisco to fly Q Suites instead of flying across the country to Montreal. And another example of this is Turkish Airlines, which flies different products depending on the aircraft that's used on any specific route. Now another really good example for using positioning flights is if you want to fly in Turkish Airlines business class, and that's because the airline uses different cabin configurations depending on the aircraft that's used on specific routes. So for example, lately Turkish Airlines has been flying the Boeing 777 between Vancouver and Istanbul, and this has a bit of an outdated business class product in a 232 configuration, which means that not everybody has direct aisle access, and you might have to walk over somebody if they're lying down and you need to get up to use the restroom. However, to many destinations in the United States, Turkish Airlines flies a much better business class cabin with a 121 configuration, which means that everybody has direct aisle access. So if you live in Vancouver or anywhere in Western Canada, you might find yourself using a positioning flight to a city in the United States like Seattle, which has a better business class option on your way to Istanbul. Now as we mentioned before, you can also consider alternative modes of transportation to get yourself from one place to another. So for example, in Europe, you might be able to catch a bus or a train or a ferry to get yourself to a different city, which may be cheaper than booking a flight. Now sometimes booking a positioning flight separately from your main flight might actually be cheaper and wind up saving you money. So if you have flights with connections that you're going to book anyway, it's worth looking at them in individual segments and comparing the cash price, because you might actually wind up saving money by booking a separate flight. Now another reason why people book positioning flights is to actually save money on the taxes and fees that are charged on a booking. So depending on the airport or the country that you're flying from, you might actually wind up paying hundreds of dollars in taxes and fees that you could avoid if you originated your journey in a different city instead. Now perhaps the best example of this is flying out of the United Kingdom, where you're subject to the UK air passenger duty, which adds a few $100s extra taxes and fees to your booking, especially if you're flying in business class or first class. However, instead of taking a long haul flight out of the UK, you could consider booking a positioning flight to somewhere else in Europe and then connecting through the UK, at which point you wouldn't be subject to the UK air passenger duty. Now one thing to consider with positioning flights is to make sure that you have the right travel insurance for your booking. And this is especially important when you book positioning flights on separate itineraries or using alternative modes of transportation. Now some travel insurance will still cover you if you're booked on separate itineraries, so make sure that you read your travel insurance coverage thoroughly or get in touch with a knowledgeable travel agent who can help you find the right product to fit your needs. So positioning flights are a key tool for you to use to get more out of your miles and points. So with a bit of careful planning, you can find that award seat that nobody else has been able to find, and then you can brag to your friends when they see videos of you flying in the best products out there. So the next time you find yourself searching for award availability, be sure to consider using positioning flights using all of the tips and tricks we've shared with you in this video. So if you liked this video and you're interested in learning more about Canada's best credit cards, be sure to check out our video of Canada's 4 best travel credit cards with no foreign transaction fees, and we'll see you there.